"Ma'am, you need to leave. This property no longer belongs to you." Those were the words I heard at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, standing on the front step of the house I had unlocked for years without thinking. The sun was already warm on the bricks, the hydrangeas needed water, and the air smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I used inside. I remember the exact time because I checked my watch twice, certain I had misheard him. I tried my keys anyway. Once. Then again, slower. They turned, but the lock refused them. The sound was wrong, metal meeting resistance where there had never been any before. Taped neatly to the door was a single sheet of paper, corners pressed flat as if it belonged there. A real estate company's logo sat at the top, crisp and official. In the center, one number was printed in bold, larger than everything else. $900,000. At the bottom was a signature I recognized instantly. I had watched that hand sign birthday cards, school forms, and thank you notes at my kitchen table. It belonged to my son's wife. I stood there longer than I should have, my purse heavy on my shoulder, my keys biting into my palm. One thought kept repeating itself, steady and unbearable, louder than the man waiting behind me. How could they do this to me? If you want to hear the rest of my story, stay with me. The truth is far worse than it looks. My name is Eleanor Gray. I am 76 years old. I am not the kind of old woman who loses receipts or forgets what she signed. For more than 40 years, I worked with contracts, fine print, and legal traps people fall into when they are too polite to ask questions. I learned early that details decide everything, and that courtesy is often the softest rope used to pull someone out of their place. I bought this house after my husband died. Not immediately. For a while, I stayed in our old apartment, where every cupboard still smelled of his tobacco and the lavender sachets I kept tucked in drawers. But one morning I realized I was walking through those rooms as if I were asking permission. So I sold the apartment and bought this house on a quiet street, where the refrigerator hummed steadily at night and the windows did not shake from strangers passing by. For the first time in my life, something was only mine. The keys were mine. The papers were mine. The silence was mine. My son, Michael, has always been gentle. Even as a boy, he avoided arguments, avoided raised voices. When tension entered a room, he was the first to smile, as if he could soften the air for everyone else. He married late, and when he brought Lindsay into our lives, I told myself I was grateful that someone so competent stood beside him. Lindsay knew how to enter a home as if it had been waiting for her. She was charming, polished, with a voice that sounded caring even when the words underneath were firm. She always knew what she wanted, a better neighborhood, better schools, better plans. And she knew how to present those wants as what was best for everyone. At first, I liked helping them. I paid for school supplies when Michael changed jobs. I reviewed paperwork, explained clauses, warned them where not to sign too quickly. I shared contacts, advice, and experience. I was useful. And being useful felt like being needed. Over time, I began to sense the difference between being needed and being valued. When I visited, Lindsay greeted me warmly, but her eyes measured time and outcomes. She loved the word plan. She spoke it as if plans mattered more than people. Michael looked at me with gratitude, but he rarely met my eyes when she stood beside him. I recognized that look. It is the look of a man who does not want to choose, so he allows someone else to choose for him. I do not confuse bitterness with hatred. Bitterness is simply memory, the moment you realize you are no longer seen as a person, but as a resource. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. After the morning with the changed lock, memories began to line up. How easily my "I'll think about it" became there of course. How my yes was assumed before it was spoken. What happened at my door did not appear suddenly. It grew quietly, like a thin crack in glass, invisible until the light hits it just right. I remember a Saturday years earlier, setting the table with my old porcelain, white with a thin blue line along the edge. Lindsay lifted a cup, turned it in her hand, and said, softly, "So sweet. But everything is so modern now." She said it kindly, as if discussing decor, not a life built piece by piece. I smiled and served her lemon cake. I always answered with actions. Gradually, they began speaking to me as one speaks to someone who must be protected. Slower. Louder. Repeating what needed no explanation. In their pauses, I was expected to admit weakness. To say, I can't manage. To hand over control. I was not lonely, as they liked to say. I was independent. I had my routines, my neighbors, my mornings with tea in the same chipped mug. My life was simple, but it was mine. Lindsay lived in urgency. Lists. Deadlines. Optimization. People included. Sometimes she looked at me as if assessing what else could be used: space, access, trust. I excused it as personality. I stayed quiet for peace. For Michael's relief. For the children running through my living room. But peace that survives only on your silence is not peace at all. That is why, standing at my door, staring at her signature, I felt fear not from losing the house, but from how confidently they acted. As if the keys were never meant to be mine. The first warning came quietly, the way real changes often do. No raised voice. No argument. Just a sentence placed carefully on the table between us, like a glass that could be knocked over later. Lindsay smiled that polite, practiced smile of hers and said, "Eleanor, don't you think living alone at your age is dangerous?" She said it while stirring her coffee, not looking at me. The spoon clicked against the mug, slow and even. Michael sat across from me, nodding slightly, as if agreeing with the rhythm of the sound rather than the words. It sounded caring. Almost thoughtful. The kind of question people ask when they want to be seen as responsible. I did not answer right away. I folded my napkin, straightened it, and took a sip of tea from my chipped mug. I remember noticing that the tea had gone lukewarm. I remember thinking how strange it was that my own kitchen suddenly felt like neutral territory. "I manage well," I said finally. My voice was calm. I did not defend myself. I did not explain. I had learned long ago that explanations invite negotiations. Lindsay's smile did not change, but her eyes sharpened, just for a second. Then she laughed lightly and said, "Of course you do. We just worry." That word stayed with me afterward. Worry. It is a convenient word. It sounds selfless. It carries authority without sounding cruel. And it allows the speaker to step closer without being invited. After that, the comments began to appear more often. Not every visit. Not too much at once. Always spaced far enough apart that I questioned my own memory. "Are you sure you paid that bill? Did you already schedule the appointment, or should we do it for you? Maybe it's time someone helped you keep track of things." Each remark arrived wrapped in concern. Each one landed a little closer to my footing. They spoke as if I had asked for assistance, even when I had not. And when I answered firmly, Lindsay would tilt her head and say, "We're just trying to help, Mom." I noticed that Michael had stopped asking me questions directly. If something needed to be discussed, Lindsay spoke for both of them. If a decision was mentioned, it was already half formed by the time it reached me. I told myself this was normal. Families change. Roles shift. I reminded myself that pride can make a person suspicious of kindness. I did not want to be that woman, difficult, defensive, ungrateful. Still, small things began to disappear. A folder I kept in the drawer was moved, to organize it better. A conversation with the bank that I had not requested. A suggestion that perhaps it would be simpler if they were copied on my mail. Each time, I said no politely. Each time, they smiled as if no did not really mean no, only not yet. I began keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Dates. Phrases. Who said what, and when. Old habits from a working life never fully leave you. When something feels unclear, you document it. One evening, as Lindsay stood by my front door putting on her coat, she turned and said, almost casually, "You know, Houses like this sell very well right now. She did not say more. She did not need to. That was the moment I understood, the question about my safety had never been about me. It had been about positioning. Testing how easily the ground beneath me could be softened. I closed the door after they left and rested my hand against the wood. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Everything was exactly as it had always been. But something had shifted. And once a line is crossed in silence, it is rarely crossed only once. After that, nothing dramatic happened. And that was the danger of it. Life continued on the surface, polite and orderly, while something underneath was being quietly rearranged. The comments became routine. Almost background noise. Did you double-check the insurance payment? We already spoke to someone about that, just in case. It's easier if we handle it together. Together slowly came to mean without me. They stopped asking before doing things. They informed me afterward, as if I had simply forgotten to be present. When I corrected them, Lindsay would blink, surprised, and say, "Oh, I thought we agreed." Michael would look at the floor, then at her, then back at me, apologetic but silent. I noticed my name appearing less often in conversations that clearly involved me. "We've been thinking," Lindsay would say. "We decided. Not you, not Eleanor. Just we." Sadness crept in first. Not sharp, not dramatic. A dull weight that settled in my chest when I realized my role was changing without my consent. I had gone from being consulted to being managed. I began to feel watched in small ways. Lindsay would glance at my hands when I signed something. She would repeat instructions slowly, as if I might forget them halfway through. Once, when I paid for lunch, she laughed and said, "Don't worry, we'll keep an eye on your spending." She said it lightly. I felt it deeply. I checked my accounts more often. Everything was still in order. But I noticed new email notifications I hadn't set up. Copies sent to addresses that weren't mine. When I asked about them, Lindsay waved a hand and said, "Just backups. For safety." Safety. Again. Michael assured me they were only trying to help. He said, "You know Lindsay worries." He said, "It's just temporary." He said, "You don't need to stress." What he did not say was, "I'll stop this." I started sleeping poorly. Not from fear, but from awareness. The kind that keeps you awake, listening to the house settle, noticing how even familiar sounds can feel different once trust shifts. One afternoon, I found that a file containing my property papers had been removed from my desk drawer. Lindsay admitted she had taken it to review something. She brought it back 2 days later, smiling, as if returning a borrowed book. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread out, the lamp casting a yellow circle of light. I touched each page, grounding myself in facts. Ownership. Dates. Signatures. My name, written clearly, where it belonged. I realized then that hurt was no longer the main emotion. It was clarity. They were not confused. They were preparing. And the longer I remained quiet, the easier I made it for them to decide my life without my permission. I washed my mug, set it upside down on the counter, and turned off the light. The house was still mine. For now. But I understood something I hadn't before. Silence was no longer neutral. It was permission. And then I was back at my front door, holding keys that suddenly belonged to the past. The man who spoke to me was not a policeman. He wore a neat jacket with a company badge clipped near the pocket. His tone was practiced, not unkind, the way people speak when they are enforcing something that has already been decided. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This property no longer belongs to you." I looked past him at my porch swing, at the pot of winter pansies I had planted myself, at the welcome mat that still said home in faded letters. My throat tightened, but I did not argue. I simply asked, "Who sent you?" He lifted a folder and tapped the paper taped to my door. "We're representing the current owner. There's a listing process underway." That was when I saw it properly. The real estate logo. The bold number. The familiar signature at the bottom. Lindsay's. My hands went cold. Not trembling, cold, as if my body was conserving itself. I stepped off the porch and sat in my car with the door still open, staring at the document through the glass as if the distance might make it less real. My phone buzzed in my purse. A message from Lindsay, cheerful and brief. Good morning. We're busy today, talk later. I drove to the branch where I'd banked for 20 years. The lobby smelled of copier toner and hand sanitizer. The young teller smiled the way they're trained to smile, and I asked, quietly, to speak to a manager. I did not say, my daughter-in-law is stealing my house. I said, I need to verify whether any changes were made to my property records or banking access while I was out of town. The manager, a woman my son's age, typed for a long time. Her face stayed professional, but her eyes flicked up once, then back to the screen. She printed a page and slid it toward me. A recent inquiry. A request for proof of funds tied to a prospective sale. And, attached to my profile, a new authorized contact email, Lindsay's address, added 3 weeks earlier. I didn't authorize that, I said. The manager nodded slowly. The request came in person. The individual presented identification and said she was acting on behalf of the homeowner. On behalf. Those 2 words landed like a door closing. I left the bank and drove to the county office, because after a lifetime in contracts, I trust paper more than explanations. I waited under fluorescent lights and took a numbered ticket like everyone else. When my turn came, I asked for the public record on my address. The clerk pulled it up, clicked, frowned, and printed what she could. There it was, a realtor's preliminary valuation filed in my properties folder, notes about seller readiness, and a scheduled walkthrough request, approved by someone who was not me. No deed transfer had been completed. Not yet. But someone was laying the track. I sat in my car again, the printed pages on the passenger seat like a stack of small insults. My hand still did not shake. My mind went oddly quiet, the way it does right before a decision. I thought of the March tea, the dangerous question, the missing folder, the backups for safety. I thought of how Lindsay always spoke as if my life were a project with deadlines. And I understood the shape of it all. While I was away visiting my sister for 4 days, Lindsay had introduced herself as the owner, met with a realtor, and started the machinery of selling my home, without permission, without signature, without consent. That was the betrayal. Not a single cruel sentence, but a series of competent steps taken over my silence. I turned off my phone. I breathed once, deep and steady. Because if I stayed quiet now, I would not only lose the house. I would disappear. Before I went anywhere else, I opened my banking app and scrolled back through notifications. There was one I had dismissed days ago, thinking it was routine, profile updated. The timestamp read 3:42 p.m. The day Lindsay had offered to pick up my mail while I was gone. Under it, a second alert, new device signed in. I had assumed it was my tablet. It wasn't. I called my neighbor, Marjorie, and asked a single question: did anyone come by my house while I was away? Marjorie hesitated, then said, a woman in heels. She walked around the yard with a man carrying a clipboard. I thought you hired them. I closed my eyes. Did she go inside? The woman tried your lock, Marjorie said. Then she made a call. 10 minutes later a locksmith van showed up. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Did you see her face? It was Lindsay, Marjorie said, softly, as if she feared the name might hurt me. I thanked her and hung up. The quiet in my car thickened. The world outside kept moving, cars and carts, while my life was being edited without my permission. And in that moment, I stopped hoping this was a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings do not hire locksmiths. Every detail mattered. I did not drive straight home. I couldn't. The thought of that new lock, of Lindsay's signature on the page, sat in my throat like a pill that wouldn't go down. I parked 2 streets away beside a small park and stayed in the car with the engine off. The winter light was thin, and I could hear children shouting somewhere behind the trees. My hands rested in my lap, still holding the county printouts. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I turned my phone face down. For the first time in years, I wanted silence more than answers. Then I opened the folder I kept in my glove box, the one I'd started after the dangerous comment, after the missing papers, after I began writing down dates. I spread my notes across the passenger seat and lined them up beside the new documents. March 11th, living alone is dangerous. April 2nd, Lindsay asked for copies of my bills to help. June 19th, property file removed, returned 2 days later. October 7th, houses like this sell very well right now. And now, a locksmith, a realtor, an email address added to my banking profile, a new device signed in. It was not one mistake. It was a pattern. And patterns are not accidents. I thought about Michael. How he would sound if I called him, tired, apologetic, asking me to be patient, asking me not to make a scene. I could already hear Lindsay in the background, whispering instructions into his ear like stage directions. A scene. That was what they feared most. Not wrongdoing. Exposure. I pictured myself walking up to that door again, arguing with strangers while my neighbors watched. I pictured being talked over, soothed, managed, told to calm down. And I felt something inside me settle, solid and quiet. If I stayed silent, I would become the problem they needed to solve. Not just from my house. From my own life. So I did what I had trained myself to do for decades. I stopped reacting and started assembling facts. I photographed every page, the valuation notes, the walkthrough request, the bank profile change, the timestamps on my app. I emailed copies to an address Lindsay had never seen. I wrote one sentence in my notebook, in block letters. Do not call Michael first. Because once I did, the story would become theirs. They would soften it, spin it, wrap it in worry. They would tell me I misunderstood, that I was confused, that my emotions were proof I needed help. I knew that playbook. I had watched it used on clients, on coworkers, on widows with polite smiles and empty bank accounts. I sat there for a long time, listening to my own breathing. The hum of my car cooling. The distant sound of a dog barking. I held my chipped mug in my mind like a small anchor, my kitchen, my routine, my right to choose. And when I finally turned my phone back over, I did not dial my son. I searched for one name in my contacts instead, a lawyer I trusted, someone who respected paperwork more than charm. My voice didn't shake when he answered. I simply said, I need to protect my home. Today. In that moment, I wasn't frightened anymore. I was ready. Before I moved, I checked the date on my phone, November 14th. I wrote it at the top of my notes, then wrote the time again, 9:14 a.m., and the man's exact words. Precision is a kind of armor. People argue with feelings. They struggle against facts. My hands finally trembled, just slightly, the way they had after my husband's funeral when everyone talked too loudly. I let it pass without shame. In the rearview mirror I saw an older woman staring back, silver hair, fine lines, steady eyes. Not weak. Not confused. Simply finished being treated like a door that could be unlocked with the right key. I squared the papers, slid them into my handbag, and started the car. The clock moved on, indifferent. I turned toward my lawyer's office and felt an odd relief, as if the choice I'd been avoiding had finally snapped into place. I was done negotiating my own life. Today. My lawyer's office was in a low brick building that smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. I arrived with my documents stacked like a small wall in my bag. When I told the receptionist my name, she looked up, then quietly said, "He's expecting you." I did not cry in his doorway. I did not raise my voice. I laid everything out on the conference table, the bank printout, the county notes, the screenshots with timestamps, my own written log. He read without interrupting, turning each page with the same careful fingers my husband once used to turn the newspaper. When he finished, he leaned back and asked one question. "Did you sign anything authorizing her to act for you?" "No," I said. "And I never would." He nodded once, as if that settled the matter. "Then we treat this as what it is. An attempted takeover." The words should have frightened me. Instead, they made me steady. Naming a thing removes its disguise. We started with the bank. On speakerphone, my lawyer requested an immediate removal of the added contact, a freeze on any profile changes without in-person verification, and alerts to my phone only. The manager I'd spoken to earlier complied quickly when she heard his name. Within 20 minutes, Lindsay's email was gone, and a note was placed on my account, no third-party access. Next, we addressed the property. He explained my options in plain language, not as advice for a classroom, but as steps for my life. A restraining letter to the realtor. A formal notice to the brokerage that their seller had no authority. And then the strongest protection we could put in place fast, transferring the house into an irrevocable trust with clear instructions that it could not be sold or mortgaged without my direct consent. I listened, asked questions, and signed only after reading every line. The pen felt heavier than usual, but my hand was sure. He arranged for a capacity evaluation, not because I doubted myself, but because Lindsay's next move would be to claim I was confused. We would remove that weapon before she could lift it. By late afternoon, the paperwork was filed, the notices were sent, and a locksmith I chose, one whose invoice would bear my name, was scheduled to meet me at the house the next morning. Before I left, my lawyer slid one more folder toward me. "From now on," he said, "communication goes through me. Not through your son. Not through her." I held that sentence like a key. Outside, the air had cooled. I sat in my car and allowed myself one slow breath. I was still hurt. I was still stunned. But beneath it all, something stronger had taken root. Lindsay had assumed I would react emotionally, then retreat. She had assumed my silence was weakness. She had forgotten what 40 years of fine print teaches a woman: when someone tries to erase you, you answer with documents, dates, and boundaries that do not bend. That evening I made one more choice: I would not let them keep this quiet. I called the brokerage listed on the paper and asked for the managing broker. "My name is Eleanor Gray," I said. "I am the sole owner of 17 Willow Bend. I did not authorize any valuation, walkthrough, or listing. Your representative has been misled." He started, "Ma'am, we were contacted by a family member." "A family member is not an owner," I said. "My attorney is emailing you proof now. Any further attempt to enter my home will be treated as trespass." I asked for his full name, wrote it down, and then did the same with the agent's license number. After I hung up, I built a binder, tabs, dates, screenshots, and a short note of Marjorie's eyewitness account. If they tried to rewrite the story, mine would already be filed. That night I set my useless house key on the nightstand beside my chipped mug, not as sentiment, but as a reminder. In the morning I would return with my own locksmith and my own paperwork. Charm might open conversations, but it would not open my door again. Ever. The next morning, my own locksmith arrived at 8:05, a quiet man with a toolbox that looked as if it had seen 1,000 ordinary emergencies. I stood beside him on the porch, my coat buttoned to the throat, my folder tucked under my arm. The real estate man was already there, with the same practiced tone and a younger agent who kept glancing at her phone. They both froze when they saw me. "I'm the homeowner," I said. "This lock was changed without my consent. My attorney has notified your office. If you have questions, you direct them to him." The locksmith replaced the cylinder in less than 10 minutes. The click of the new key turning felt like a line being drawn. I walked inside first, not to prove anything to them, but to myself. Nothing was stolen. That would have been crude. But things had been shifted. My desk drawer was half open. The folder that held my will and insurance papers had been moved. Someone had been here, touching my life with confident hands. I took photographs, then made tea and waited. The first call came at 10:22. Michael. His name glowed on the screen like a bruise. I let it ring out. Lindsay called next. Then a text appeared. Lindsay, Eleanor, what are you doing? The realtor says you're refusing to cooperate. Michael is upset. Please call. There it was, her instinct to make my boundary look like misbehavior. At noon, my lawyer called. They contacted the brokerage, he said. Your daughter-in-law claimed you were declining and needed help. She implied the house was meant to be sold for family reasons. Family reasons. Another soft phrase, meant to make control sound like duty. The brokerage backed off fast once they received proof of ownership, the trust filing, and the formal notice that Lindsay had no standing. The walkthrough was cancelled. The process stopped like a machine with its power cut. That afternoon, Michael showed up in my driveway. He stood at the door, eyes red as if he hadn't slept. Lindsay stayed in the car, watching through the windshield. Mom, he said, why didn't you call me? I kept the door chain in place. Because you would have asked me to calm down instead of asking her to stop. She said you told her to handle things, he whispered. I did not, I said. And you know I would never give someone my home as a favor. Lindsay finally stepped out, smoothing her coat, wearing that bright expression she used at dinners. Eleanor, she began, this is a misunderstanding. We were trying to keep you safe. I cut her off. You hired a locksmith. Her smile faltered. It was just. A locksmith, I repeated. That isn't concern. That's control. Michael turned to her. You changed her locks? Michael, don't start. Did you do it? Silence answered first. Then she said, too quickly, I had to. Your mother wouldn't listen. I watched my son understand something he had avoided for years. Not with shouting. With a quiet, painful clarity. The consequences arrived in plain ways. The realtor stopped returning Lindsay's calls. The brokerage documented the incident. The bank noted her attempt at access. Professionals talk when someone tries to pull them into fraud, and Lindsay's careful reputation began to loosen. That week, the practical fallout began to land where Lindsay lived, on schedules and optics. A weekend trip she had planned for all of us became her problem when the credit card she'd used as a backup stopped working for anything tied to my accounts. The resort called her for verification. Without my name behind her, doors didn't open. She tried to turn it into my cruelty. She told a cousin I was confused and making trouble. The cousin called me gently, then went quiet when I offered to forward the notices and timestamps. Michael came back alone 2 nights later. He didn't ask for keys. He just sat at my kitchen table and stared at the steam rising from his tea. I didn't know, he said. I believe you, I answered. But you didn't want to know, either. He nodded, small and ashamed. She said it was for the family. Which family? I asked. The one that needs my consent, or the one that uses me? He looked down. That was his answer. He told me Lindsay was furious, that she'd called my lawyer dramatic. Then she cried, then blamed him. He said quietly too, I think I've been borrowing your backbone. 2 days later, she brought cupcakes and an apology that sounded rehearsed. I'm sorry if you felt disrespected, she said. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation. I nodded once. Thank you. My answer is still no. They left that evening with nothing they wanted, no access, no keys, no signature, no leverage. The only thing I gave them was the truth, spoken plainly. After they drove away, I sat at my kitchen table and chose my chipped mug. I held it in both hands and listened to the refrigerator hum. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. And the house felt like mine again. I did not celebrate. I did not throw anything away in anger. I simply put my life back in my own hands, one ordinary decision at a time. On Friday, I changed every password I could think of. Email. Banking. Utilities. I canceled the shared logins Lindsay had set up and replaced them with my own. I bought a thick notebook and wrote down the new recovery codes in ink, not in someone else's cloud. Then I locked that notebook in a small fire box under my bed, beside my husband's watch and the deed copy my lawyer insisted I keep. The trust papers arrived the next week, stamped and final. I read them slowly at my kitchen table, the morning light falling across the pages. My name was there, clean and undisputed. The house could not be sold on a whim. It could not be handled for me. If anything happened to me, it would go where I said, not where someone pushed. Michael came by less often after that. When he did, he looked tired, as if the air in his own home had turned thin. He tried to talk around it, work, the kids, the weather, but eventually he said, "She thinks you hate her." I stirred my tea and listened to the spoon click against the mug. "I don't hate her," I said. "I don't trust her." "Those are different." He nodded like a boy hearing a rule he should have learned years ago. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop offering me as a solution," I told him. "I want you to be a son, not a messenger." It was the first boundary I had ever spoken to him without softening it. He swallowed, then said quietly, "I'm trying." I believed him. Trying is not nothing. But it is not the same as changing. So I built a life that did not depend on his courage. I joined the library volunteer group on Wednesdays, shelving returns and reading to children who still believed stories always ended kindly. I started taking a gentle water aerobics class at the community center where nobody called me mom as a way to manage me. They called me Eleanor, and they meant it. I planted new herbs in the back garden, rosemary and thyme, because I wanted the yard to smell like something that belonged to the present, not just memory. I invited Marjorie over for soup and we ate at my table with the blue-rimmed plates Lindsay once dismissed. We laughed about nothing in particular, the way women do when they feel safe. There were consequences I did not control. Michael and Lindsay's marriage grew strained under the weight of what had been exposed. She resented him for hesitating. He resented her for pushing. That was theirs to carry. Mine was simpler: keep my door locked with my own key, and keep my voice steady. One evening, months later, Michael stood on my porch and said, "She wants to apologize again." I said, "She can. But apologies don't reopen access." He looked relieved, almost grateful, as if my firmness gave him permission to stop negotiating. He left, and I went back inside, washed my chipped mug, and set it on the rack to dry. The house was quiet. Not lonely. Quiet the way a room feels after you've told the truth and you no longer have to hold your breath. In spring, I took a short train trip to the coast by myself, 2 nights in a small inn with creaky stairs and clean white sheets. I walked the boardwalk with a scarf at my neck, bought a cup of chowder and watched gulls circle the water. I came home certain, independence is a muscle and mine was still strong. I rewrote my will. Not out of spite, out of accuracy. I left gifts for the grandchildren, set aside money for a local women's shelter, and named a trusted friend as my medical proxy so family reasons could never be used against me again. When the envelope was sealed, I felt lighter, as if I'd cleared clutter from a hallway. Some nights I missed the illusion of closeness. But I preferred an honest distance to a warm smile with a hidden agenda. I slept better knowing my life could not be quietly reassigned while I was out buying groceries. People look at gray hair and assume surrender. They think it means confusion, slowness, a gentle fading. What they don't see is memory. Years of watching patterns repeat. Years of learning when kindness is being borrowed and when it is being taken. I am still in my house. The same one. The porch swing still creaks when I sit down in the evening. The refrigerator still hums at night. My chipped mug still fits my hands just right. But I am not the same woman who once thought silence would keep the peace. What I learned is simple and heavy at the same time: love does not require you to disappear. Family does not mean forfeiting your name, your keys, or your voice. And concern that ignores consent is not concern at all. I did not win. I did not lose. I chose myself. Quietly. Procedurally. Without shouting or revenge. I set boundaries that do not move when someone frowns at them. Michael and I speak now, carefully. Lindsay keeps her distance. That is the balance. Not perfect. Just honest. I no longer explain my decisions as if they need approval. I make them, and that is enough. Some evenings I light a candle and sit by the window as the sky darkens. I think of how close I came to being erased by politeness. How easily a life can be reassigned when a woman doubts her own authority. If this story made you pause, if it touched something familiar, know this: it is not too late to protect what is yours. Not with anger. With clarity. And if this resonated with you, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. I am still standing. And my door opens only when I choose.